Reality is really big, which is why we need a map, a simplistic map, a heuristic symbol to group patterns of reality together into representational forms that we can relate to reality through the map, much like a road map distills in a very crude way, just enough data to know where to change lanes as we're navigating through the terrain. And what I want to explore here is one version of such a map that reveals some useful data. And the paradigm of the map is a fractal pattern, a fractal scatter pattern, that there's a shape that's reverberating personally and interpersonally on numbers of different scales. So we have the individual, we have the family, we have the community, the country, the species. And at every different level, this same pattern, which, as all fractal patterns, repeats itself essentially the same with minor variations just at bigger and smaller scales, the nature of a fractal pattern. Now, another dual, parallel paradigm through which to view this might be holographic, because one of the interesting things about holographic light patterns is you can take a hologram, you can smash it into 100 pieces, and from one piece of the hologram, you can extrapolate the original image because it's expressed in the light scatter patterns at bigger and smaller scales. And so I'm going to be diving in and out through the different levels of the pattern, but one of the things that this suggests is that if we truly understand one individual, we understand the whole of the species. If we can intimately know one representation of the pattern, and the smallest representation that we know is the human ego, the individual, that we can understand through extrapolation, through zooming in and zooming out, a great deal about the species and reality itself. Now, I've created a spiral here to symbolize our passage through time. We move through time and we move through the pattern in very much of a spiral-like nature. Now, one could also use a sphere, but in our passage of time, the adult, for example, contains within it the infant, the child, the adolescent, as present ingredients in that which makes the adult. It's one of the bases for the theory of doing past regression and inner visualization and transformational of past traumatic events, is that if we change what happened at a certain zone in the past, and in some of these, depending on one's perspective, one's zeroing in, or one's going out, one's starting at this moment of conception and gradually getting bigger, or in the framework of the rings of a tree, where you slice the tree as the tree grows with each new layer of life, with each new year. All of the other rings are contained within the tree. So as we start penetrating the refraction of consciousness of a newly born ego start noticing pre-verbally what facial expressions in our environment are met with grace, are met with joy, are met with receptivity, with presence, and which parts of what wants to come out. Because you have an energy, a probability field that is bigger than the status quo, than the existing material scatter pattern or fractal pattern. In the outer reality, you have the possibility, the probability, through the innocence, through the stem cell of the infant, of the child coming in and beginning through mirroring, through noticing what gets honored within a paradigm in which, as an infant, we must rapport, we must relate to some degree with our environment, and most particularly with the feminine, masculine, the symbols of that environment in the mother and father, in the male, female of the guardian. We come in and we start experiencing, for several years before language, that which registers, that which matters, that which gets a positive response and that which gets a negative response. Coming into the point where we start to learn language, which is the moment of the birth of the conscious mind. It's very rare to remember something pre-language unless we can take language back to the pre-language arena within the psyche, to that point in the spiral where we didn't know language at the time, but we have a biological memory in our own body of how and why we got to be programmed in a certain way, oriented through positive and negative feedback into a pattern. And of course, language is very limited because vocabulary is very limited, and it's very focused within a given culture. In a materialistic culture, the vocabulary learned will be all about things. In an inner state-oriented culture, the language learned will be all about distinctions in inner state and in presence. And as a fish in water, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. In a framework in which 99% of all reality is unknown, we're moving through this pattern, being influenced by our need to survive, to feel secure, to feel a sense of love and belonging, to develop a sense of self-esteem, to develop attributes that are deemed useful and honorable within the culture, within the environment in which they are developed. As Warren Buffett pointed out, he's very lucky, given his particular attributes, to be born in the 50s or so in the United States, 40s, whatever, in a country and in a culture that, one, understands mathematics, that, two, values mathematical intelligence and values money so highly, which is in many ways, in an investment paradigm, a mathematical framework, meaning using mathematics is the most successful way to invest in the long term, getting through the bubble, mania, underlying fundamentals. So in our culture, Buffett is a genius. But in another culture where stocks did not exist, where a somewhat socially awkward young man could not prove himself with numbers, Buffett might be an outcast. And in other cultures, where people are not graded and given social rank, based on specific external competencies, he would have been one of many equal in the circle. So we have this framework. And as we start to get language, we start to understand the sounds that correlate with those things that we have already learned are welcome and unwelcome within the parental and the cultural framework. So we're moving along. Now, one of the interesting things about the heart is, just like the body, it is a scientific organism. It is a dimension. Feelings are a dimension. Feelings and emotions are a dimension through which to experience reality. And much like a microscope provides a tool, an instrument, in order to explore the dimension of sight at the microscopic level, our feelings and emotions are observable responses within our environment through the scientific instrument of either the heart, if we, through language, partition the heart separately, or through the body, understanding that consciousness, including emotional consciousness, is related. We're relating to feelings and emotions based on how they feel in our body and how we feel about the symmetry, the correlation between those feelings and emotions in the paradigms of thought. So it has influence if we say that anger is bad and bad is bad, and when you are bad, you do not meet your human needs for survival, security, love, and belonging as much. Then, as soon as anger emerges, we're looking at it both through the lens of the body. How does anger feel in this moment that induces anger? As well as what do we think about the feeling of anger? What do we believe? And what do we feel based on that thought and that belief? So there's this matrix of ecological relationship between heart, mind, and body. Of course, there are hundreds of distinctions that could communicate heart, mind, and body in much more sophisticated ways. But we, as a culture that develops physical awareness less than internal awareness, do not have the quality of consciousness to easily distinguish heart, mind, and body in 100 different ways, as much as we can grasp the 3 different ways. And in our culture, where we discourage the feminine and discourage feelings and emotions relative to thoughts and bodies, many of us cannot even distinguish the difference between a thought and a feeling, or a body sensation and a feeling. So we come through this pattern. And as we're developing the pattern, parts of us are either included and welcomed within the egoic structure. The egoic structure simply being a lens that separates what we call me from the same pattern that we call other. When we understand that it's a fractal pattern, we understand that in truth, there is no distinction between the individual, the family, the community, the culture, the country, and the species. It is simply the same pattern, the same energy pattern expressed in different scales. When we understand that, the ego lens, the artificial partition in consciousness reinforced by the culture that says this is you and this is not you, is part of a learned pattern, but it's also a pattern in consciousness in that we are more attuned to the density of what's going on in our own body than we are in the density of what's going on in the plant that we just drove our car over or the other person. As we're moving through this pattern, parts of us are validated, parts of us are mirrored, parts of us are tolerated, parts of us are allowed, and there are different patterns. There are things that we tolerate in behavior but say that we hate. There are other things that we tolerate or don't tolerate in behavior that we say that we love, but we don't tolerate them. We say that we want more caring individuals, but if we walk up to a stranger and say, I'd like to care for you in some way, what would be the best way to do that? The culture doesn't tolerate the behavior that it is stating that it is positive. And so you have these distinctions once you create and fragment the heart, mind, and body into different camps. You now have distinct behavior where the thoughts or the words say this, the behavior says this, and the feelings are somewhere in the middle. A dissonance as opposed to a congruency or a resonance. Now, one of the things that we have as a phenomena is trauma. And a good way of understanding trauma, and why it's so important in understanding this map of reality, is that trauma is unattuned energy that we call it a variety of different things. We call it violence. For example, what's the difference between this as a touch and this as a touch? It could be the same exact movement, but when it happens at 1 second per foot of movement, we call it massage or touch or affection. But if it happens at 400 feet per second, we call it violence. We call it a violation because it's not attuning. The force, the speed is not attuning to the rhythms of the organism it's contacting. So we call unattuned energy, unattuned force, violent in its disregard for the rhythm of the consciousness and the organism it's intersecting. At volume 2, we call it relaxing music. At volume 230, we call it a mind-numbing, mind-freezing, overwhelmingly painful sound. Because the ear has gone from being engaged and heightened as a source of pleasure and attunement into being so fragmented with the intensity of sound that it starts to dissolve the ears. 5G, the controversial cell phone ban that's being put out, being both a weapon for crowd dispersal and creating a burn sensation in the body, as well as a communication tool when carefully attuned to the right amount. And one of the most important things to understand is that the psyche refracts. It refracts into the archetypal energies as one refraction, into the mythological energies as another refraction. But the thing to think about is the spherical color wheel. The thing to think about is the fact that as you break the rainbow, into smaller and smaller pieces. You can go into 256 million different colors like a computer, or you can just say color versus black and white, a very binary distinction, a very crude distinction. There's color, there's black and white, or there's black and there's white, and then there's color, or there's 256 million colors. So consciousness naturally refracts into as big a shape as we can hold, into as many distinctions as we have language and practice. It's very much a practice of exploring and connecting with reality. This makes me a little uncomfortable here. At the same time, it's curious over here. At the same time, it's scary over here. At the same time, it's very interesting over here. At the same time, there's uncertainty and nervousness over here at the same time. So we have a moment. As we travel through this spiral in time, we have a moment. And that moment is brought into consciousness not just by the moment in time, but the refraction with the environment. We have the refraction with the environment, which is what are the sound levels and nature in the environment at that moment in time? What are the meanings associated with those sounds? If there are words, what are the words and what are the meanings of those words? Each of these help to refract the possibility field, the probability field of the moment into something we call reality. And one of the things that we have is the human heart is constantly generating a response of a feeling, which is a read on what's going on in the moment. The feeling is what's going on in the moment. The emotion, internalized feeling, is a larger container. For example, in a couple relationship where you're having an argument with someone you love very much, the emotion of care and love contains the span of the whole relationship, whereas the feeling is what's going on in that exact moment. I love you very much is one of the emotions carried in the relationship. The feeling, what you're doing right now, I can't stand it, or it brings me so much pleasure. So there's this distinction in the different zoom in point in time. You zoom in to complete forgetfulness, complete innocence, complete presence in the moment. It's all about what's happening right now. As you zoom out, the emotions are about what's happened in the entire relationship over time. So a distinction between the present and that which has been internalized. Similarly, a thought coming into the moment, a belief, usually referencing periods of time. A belief that people are good or people are bad by observing behavior in a given environment over time, leading to a belief. The belief, however, as the emotion, affects the feeling. So you've got different lenses through which reality is crystallizing into the perception and conception of consciousness right here in the moment. So we're going through space, experiencing a given environment, which is an environment of all of the sensory data overlaid with the past, overlaid as the past is projected instinctually into the future from the observation that which has happened and is happening tends to move forward as a fractal pattern until a force equal or greater in momentum meets that force and pushes back to some degree. So we have the feeling of joy in the moment coupled with certain tension points in my cheekbones relating to the past. In this case, the anxiety of understanding the small attention span of a majority of human beings. A small attention span, a low fractal tolerance for distinction, and the pain of loss, the recurring pain of loss, as I explore the distinction and explore the macro view that goes beyond the point where a majority choose or are able to participate, to join me, creating a tension between the beauty of the nuance, the beauty of the energy at scale in its full pattern, and the loneliness, the sadness of separation as that which is beautiful, that which is complex, diverges with a majority consciousness, thus creating the feeling of isolation. And so the tension, part of the grief that is not welcome, the anxiety that goes from being pushed aside, having this part of who I am marginalized to protect a status quo. As these things happen moment by moment, looking at the complex, if you think of the psyche cut into, let's just start with 30 slices of pizza. As the full integrity of that circle intersects with the environment, with the culture, some of those pieces are thrown away. Others of those pizza are ignored as if they don't exist. Others of those pizzas are viewed as very delicious. And so that color wheel within the psyche is continually getting feedback, moment by moment, overlaid with thousands of past patterns to give us a sense of the fractal pattern of which we are a part. And those things which are rejected, I indicate here with a negative, with a minus sign. Those things which are invited to the table, I indicate with a positive sign. And there's a very important moment within our relationship with ourselves in which, as some parts of us, it would be as if the environment does not welcome information about its own scarcity. So the feelings that refract the reality and reveal the scarcity are also not welcome. So there's a tightening of the space, there's a withdrawal of intention, there's an increase in hostility and aggression, there's an increase in fear, all which in that tightening dynamic creates more and more scarcity, and it requires more and more energy to communicate that particular vibration within a given environment, within a given culture, within a given physical environment. Now, as human beings in a hierarchy of human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing our gifts, sharing those gifts with the world, transcending the sense of our individuality and becoming part of something bigger, as we moving through that pattern, as we encounter the minus, that's not welcome, that's scary, that's seen as disgusting, etc. As we encounter the resistance and the tightening, the rejection within the moment, within a given environment. And it's very important to understand this given environment. It's the gift of travel, is that you can be you and go to 100 different countries and discover that in this country, this part of you is honored and seen. And in this country, this same part of you is treated with disgust. And in this other culture and country, it's not even noticed. And in this other culture and country, it's viewed with great joy. And it's seen and believed differently, as the same part of ourselves is experiencing a different response. Now, in those environments in which part of us are met with resistance, with attack, with disgust, with fear, etc., there's a very important pivot point, which is, do we reject and internalize the fear, the shame, the disgust, the rejection towards this part of ourself in order to feel welcome in the environment in which we are a part? Do we reject who we are? For example, as I enter terrain, as I, the little me, enters the terrain in which 80% of people say, "Oh, that's I don't like that. Let's do something else. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to talk about that." As we enter the terrain in which a vast majority of other people reject, cut, block, do we understand the dis-ease in the environment and understand the asymmetry, the limitations of the environment around us? That we're in an environment in which we're bringing energy forth, but the environment lacks the sophistication, the intelligence, the science and technology to extract and do something beautiful, good, healthy, and life-affirming with that energy. In other words, just like there are, just as there are cars that can accept gasoline but not diesel, or there are different fuels. There is gasoline, and there is diesel, and there is electricity, and there is light energy. There's different forms of energy. And if you give diesel to a tribe without a combustion engine, it smells bad, it tastes bad, it's toxic. So they may reject diesel. If you give electricity to a culture that doesn't have a place for electricity, it shocks them, it's scary, and it's rejected. But it's important to understand the nexus in the middle. That on the one hand, there are all these forms of energy. Hate is a form of energy. Joy is a form of energy. Wonder, gasoline, electricity, nuclear force, earthquakes, gravitational pull. These are all forms of energy. So you have the infinite array of energy on the one hand. And then you have the infinite ways that those energies can be received and integrated and something good done with them. For example, if you have a can of diesel and you are in an environment that produces diesel cars, one, and produces people that understand diesel, then your diesel can be poured into an ambulance and someone is rushed off to the emergency room with that diesel, and that diesel becomes a life-affirming form of energy. If there is no diesel car and there's no people there that understand diesel, you provide the diesel and they don't know what to do with it and they want you to take it away. And this is one of the interesting phenomena in language and in particularly Western consciousness, where we have the idea of garbage, that which we do not know what to do with, and therefore we do not want. Therefore we spend energy to haul it away and suppress because we don't want to spend the energy to figure out what to do with it. And so we push it away. And as a fractal pattern, we can learn from this when we're in a culture that produces more garbage, more energy than we know what to do with, or that any culture in human history has known what to do with. Because an American is going to produce 100 tons of garbage from cradle to grave. 100 tons. Meaning the recipe of consciousness, the recipe of engaging with heart, mind, and body in America by weight is going to produce 100 tons. Now, if you think of 200 pounds for the average adult body, or 150, but let's just say 200 pounds, well, then every year, you're going to have 5 times. You're going to have 10 times the weight of the organism in stuff we don't know what to do with. And so we don't do it. And if we understand that's a fractal pattern, we can also understand that this carries over. We can look in the mental emotional arena and see the same pattern. We can say that if in a year we create a minimum of a ton of garbage, and that garbage is simply that energy we lack the sophistication to know what to do with, we can then start to see that within a year, we will also create 10 times as many thoughts as we know what to do with. We will discard and in many ways suppress and bury 10 times more feelings. For every feeling that we know what to do with, there'll be 10 feelings that we don't want that feeling, we don't want that feeling, and we just want to get rid of it. We want to bury it in landfills of consciousness. We want to suppress it down into the unconscious, which of course, no energy is created or destroyed. It just changes form. Plants become oil. Oil becomes plastic. And plastic will in turn become something else. No energy is created or destroyed. It is simply transformed. When we call it garbage, we have simply run into the limit of our own humility, of our own creativity, of our own imagination, and of our own intelligence to discover what to do with that energy. It's fascinating. So a map, such as a fractal pattern, provides insight and perspective to deal with a pattern of energy that is vastly more complex than what I'm describing. But just like a microscope allows you to see certain structures at a cellular level that provide insight that can be used to navigate, to decide how much bacteria is on a doctor's hand in a way that can be useful. So a useful map of reality and of our place in it can provide useful guidance. Now, as we reach and meet these parts in us that those around us consider garbage, our wife expresses jealousy, and we don't know what to do with it. and they don't know what to do with it. So we say, go away with that jealousy. Why? Because it's a form of energy. It's often very intense, but we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to create well-being with energy in that form. We also often don't know how to create an environment that creates joy and abundance instead of jealousy. Because there are two issues here when an emotion gets buried and when a persona, an identity, a micro pattern of thinking, feeling, and doing and speaking, some part of us, one of the images is of identity being, like little beads on a thread. So I'm this person at a bar, I'm this person at this other bar, I'm this person when I'm with this person, I'm this person when I'm at church, I'm this, all these little identities. That there are some identities that nobody around us likes. I don't like the part of you that likes heavy metal music, and well, I don't like it in me either, but it's there. And so we have this pivot point when some part of who we are encounters resistance and rejection. Do we covet and curry the favor and acceptance of others by disowning that part of ourself and putting it into our dark or light shadow? For example, I might have a great joy in sharing kindness with others, and I might love to just see their happiness. But as I begin to do that in this group, it's called weird. And well, what's weird? Well, it's that thing that we don't like talking about. Well, we don't want to talk about why we don't want to talk about it. And so you have a choice. You can either be marginalized because you honor that part which is not received, which is not honored within the given environment. Or you can reject it and say, yeah, I don't know what's with this part of me that likes to see other people happy. That is weird. And weird is bad. So let me throw that part away into some part that's beautiful about myself that I don't own because nobody else owns it, because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to create well-being with it. Because it takes technology, that point of meeting, it takes technology to meet in the middle. Meaning someone has to invent the diesel engine before someone else who invents diesel can bring the diesel engine and diesel together to create motion. And then someone else has to invent the metal, and someone else has to invent a vehicle, and then someone else has to invent a reason to move the vehicle. And then someone else has to find the thing to put in the vehicle to move. And if all of that comes together, then if you bring someone diesel, they say, oh, this is great. Why are you giving me this free diesel? This is really valuable. Anyone, you say, anyone want free diesel? Oh, we'll take millions of gallons of it. We'll stockpile it. We'll build tanks for it because it's so valuable. But it's only valuable in that given environment. There's another version of fuel called Friesel. Now, it hasn't been invented yet. Or for the sake of this purpose, it hasn't been invented yet, and nor has the technology to utilize it. And so if you give someone a can of Friesel, they're like, well, what's this? And you say, it's Friesel. And they're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is, so I don't know how to use it usefully, so it has no value. Now, it could be a cleaner fuel. It could be that it could drive a vehicle 10 times further than diesel. But if that vehicle hasn't been invented, if there's no understanding of that, it may be discarded. And so we're in that kind of environment where large portions of the psyche interact with an environment that does not know how to relate to it because it lacks the technology to relate to it. And lacking that technology to relate to it, it's then rejected and fought. And then we have the choice to stand by that part of ourself that is just as valuable as any other inherently, or to spend energy to discard it to make other people feel more comfortable. Now, this is a very interesting and a very important moment, particularly when we're looking at constellations of thoughts, feelings, and doings. So, for example, if I, as a male, find the body of a young male child or a young male girl beautiful, but I'm in a culture that is terrified at anything near there because of the lack of distinction between something that is innocent and something that is somehow dangerous. Well, then anything near this terrain may be thrown out, not only not valued, but actually viewed as a great enemy, used as the basis to destroy great value, like a career or other things of this nature. And so you have, as a species, the development. We have things like the Puritanical age, where just talking about the body might be viewed as a shameful act, something that is bad and that we don't talk about and we don't know what to do with. And so we burn people on the stake, women that understood herbs, burning them at the stake because it doesn't fit within our technology. Or, Mr. Nixon saying that the most dangerous person in the United States at the time, Timothy Leary, someone suggesting that LSD could be beneficial, that this marginalized, seen as a threat because we don't know what to do with the energy, with the types of personas and identities that are born in that environment. When you change the substance, when you change the physicality of the environment, you affect the identity of those in the environment. And that's true with cigarettes or alcohol or opium or mushrooms or food or water or air or heat. All of these things affect the identity. And when an identity is rejected, the self, by the environment, the self has the choice to either reject that identity in shame and participate in the exorcism, the elimination, the disowning, the dishonoring and rejecting. This is the nature of a demonic exorcism. I had a thought, I had a feeling, and that is a demon. I don't want that part. When I tell everyone else about that part, they are horrified. And so the whole ritual is one of getting rid of some part within that's responding to some part without, that's existing in a framework of language. There has to be a language for a demon before you can have a demon. And there has to be the concept of having. You see, some cultures don't have the concept of having. They say, what do you mean you have something? No, you don't have something. You are a part of something. You don't have it. Or the Indians trying to grasp this idea of land ownership. How can you own that which is bigger than you, which feeds you? Meaning, you don't own the air. You exist because there is air to breathe. You are in a dance with air. You cannot own it. But we've invented, we've created a different culture in which everything is owned, in which it makes us very uncomfortable if we say, here's this thing, and we say, well, who owns it? That's the first thing you want to know in a materialistic culture. Who owns that thing? We say, well, it's not a thing, first of all. It's a part of all of us. And then you say, well, okay, fine, semantics, bullshit, New Age garbage, but who owns it? It's like, well, nobody owns it. Well, then I'll take it and then it'll be mine. It's like, I see. So if nobody owns it, then it's yours. Yes, because someone has to own it within a paradigm of ownership. And so this it doesn't even make sense like a fish out of water. Once you have language and culture wrapped around a particular arena of the self. Now, once we disown an identity that has been disowned by the cult, and it's a useful word, cult, because it means conformity with the dominant mass. It means conformity outside of scientific reference. So-and-so said this, and we all follow so-and-so. And because we all follow so-and-so, and because they said this, that is the way it is. And it is the way it is because that's what this person said. So we have a complete self-referencing loop. And in that dynamic, when some part of us has been rejected, has been disowned, it creates a dissociated pocket of energy. A pocket of energy that we have repressed, suppressed, denied, dissociated from consciously, but we have not ended the energy. You know, if I say, wow, here's a chalk I have, and someone pipes up and says, you mean to say you have chalk? I say, it's right here. It's my chalk. They say, chalk is terrible. You don't know that slave children are going into the production of chalk? You don't know that for every piece of chalk it kills one child's life? You don't know that? It's like, no, I didn't know that. Well, that makes you a murderer of those children. In fact, if you write another thing on this blackboard, you have just told all of us that you would rather own chalk than care about children. And in this cult, that's unacceptable. It's like, oh, I had no idea. So I take the chalk and I throw it away because I don't want to be a bad person in a cult in which bad people are punished. And so now I've thrown the chalk away. Oh, no chalk around here. In fact, I got rid of my whole box chalk. In fact, those evil, who it's unthinkable to own chalk suddenly because that's the group dynamic. Well, the chalk doesn't disappear because I'm disowned it. If I throw it out the window, it slowly dissolves back into the land. If it's arsenic and I throw that out the window, it slowly poisons the plants and things around it or gets into the water and someone. It doesn't disappear. All energy stays in existence mentally, emotionally, and physically until such time as it is transformed into another energy. That's the nature of reality. So when we take jealousy or fear or rage or bits of chalk or anything else that a cult arbitrarily decides is not acceptable and throw it away, we can then put up an artificial barrier that says that I've changed now. I am no longer someone that uses chalk. And true, you can stop using chalk and whatever. Hopefully there's a new fad to get in line to replace chalk so that you can still communicate. In the Chinese dynamic, even that was gotten rid of. They actually slaughtered intellectuals in Maoist China because it wasn't enough. They burnt the books, and that but there were still people that seemed smarter than other people, and so they sent them to labor camps, and also executed them to get rid of intelligence. For a time. But the psyche's nature is to return to wholeness. to complete the circle. That which is suppressed and denied is always seeking to move back into a state of grace. And the state of grace is very similar to many Zen teachings of allowing, where rather than when anger or fear or chalk or intelligence emerges in an unpopular cultural in a setting, where it's invited, it's tolerated, and said, well, here we are. We are here. And I see there is anger inside. I see there is this. You're welcome. What can you teach me, my anger? What can you teach me, my hate? What do you have to say to me? How can I learn from what you have to say? And how can I respond? And this is the tricky thing within a cultural framework, because the real question is, how can I respond without being killed, without being traumatized, without having my ability to meet my human needs, to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, knocked out from under me because everyone has decided that whatever particular expression that is the enemy, and so cannot be expressed. Now, this distinction, I'm dwelling on it because when we dissociate from an identity, suppress, deny, shame, and reject, we do not get rid of the identity or the energy of ourselves stored in the energy. It becomes a pocket in which, because we have dissociated from it, which is a ritual of saying, that's not me. Maybe it used to be me, but I've changed. I no longer have feelings. I no longer am so emotional. Whatever it is, in our culture, we love to attack feminine energy. And so we have communicated successfully to a majority of women in the United States that to be deeply emotional is unacceptable, unpopular. It's not cool. It's not desirable. It's not sexy. In that dynamic, of course, all the emotions that go along with having a scientific instrument called a human heart still are produced in response to every dynamic, just as like they ever were. It would be as if we wanted to banish the view of microscopic organs without destroying the microscope. And every time we look through the microscope and see an organism and say, wow, there's so many organisms in there, everyone said, I don't want to hear about that. So we apologize. And so we have a culture in which feelings and emotions are apologized for and seen as shameful, and in which it's seen as very cool and even very fuckable to have wit and sarcasm and cutting edges without vulnerability, without feeling. It's seen as incredibly uncool and unpopular to be doubled over in the pain of feeling something deeply, a loss, a grief, something being torn apart, physically, emotionally, mentally. This is very unpopular. So people do that in secret, and they try and partition it during the day to spend great amount of energy stabilizing the face, which was designed to reflect and communicate feelings, into a face that communicates nothing. And this is considered beneficial or sophisticated or mature. Just words we've thrown at that particular habit of suppression within our cult. So when we participate, so we have a couple of things. When a cult is very vicious in its and dogmatic in its rejection of part of the psyche, any woman is a witch. If she's brewing anything or singing or enjoying the star, anything like that, witches. And so let's burn her alive. Well, it becomes very dangerous to honor that part of us that sees the intelligence and in the energy forms called plants, or moonlight, or singing. These are all energy forms. They're rituals of energy. And so the people that own that part of themselves or get caught in that part of themselves, we used to do this with homosexuality. See, we had a whole cult, and we still have large sections of the cult where if there's a sexual attraction, an energy that is same gender, there are families that don't know what to do with that energy. And so they try and suppress it and shame it and block it, and which leaves everyone with a choice. Do I partition this part of myself off and reject it to facilitate the ignorance and the fear of the cult around me? Or do I stick with it and allow myself to be killed, burned, shamed, disowned, not invited to the party? There's many forms of death. We're much more civilized in that, we just don't invite that energy. Anyone who expresses that thing doesn't get invited to the party. Anyone who expresses that doesn't get promoted. Anyone who is expressed doesn't do this doesn't get a house. Well, suddenly you've reduced people into a traumatic state, and they have a very difficult choice: to love and accept all of me and have it rejected because it's a part of me, or to deny and suppress this part of me. But what's interesting is what happens to this energy once it's dissociated and denied and suppressed. It goes into the shadow, which means it's just out of view. And a good way of looking at this is to know that there's a light shadow and a dark shadow. And that this range of very narrow, politically correct conformity is acceptable. And it's very important to understand that the political correctness movement in the United States today is getting close to the point of the Maoist Chinese, of going around and shooting people that were intelligent. For example, teachers were shot in China because it wasn't politically correct. That level of fanaticism, where we have professors of universities raped, tied up, intimidated, shamed, attacked physically by students in the far left. This has been going on in the far right at times, with African-American brutality, etc., in the Ku Klux Klan. But in the far left, where you now have at the University of Berkeley violent protests, locking professors up, not letting them go to the bathroom, because the narrowness of that point of view is not tolerated. And there is a righteousness around this fanaticism that, take it a little bit further along, and we might start burning our university professors at the stake, or burning Jordan Peterson at the stake, because he does not fit into the political correctness. And in many ways, the extremists, the police and the criminal, the far left and the far right, the dogmatic scientists and the dogmatic religious preachers have much more in common in their fixation and fear of anything that gets outside of that narrow band of political correctness. This very narrow part that's in a very young part of the psyche that says it has to be like this or you die. And we teach this to our children with the level of intensity that we direct at children when they deviate from that which makes the parent feel safe and look good in the cult that they're in. When you have the brutality, many situations in the shame-based homosexual areas where fathers might beat up or even kill their sons rather than risk the beauty, the truth, the goodness, the complexity of that boy's homosexuality coming out into a town that did not know how to respond with that energy, so it put it into the garbage arena. You can tell the intelligence of a culture by how much garbage it has. The more garbage a culture creates, the less intelligent it is. Because garbage is a complete illusion. It just means that this is a culture that spends large amounts of time, money, and natural resources to produce things they don't know what to do with, and then leaves them there with a depleted environment. That's not intelligence. And so, whether psychologically or physically, in a fractal pattern, there's a correlation. In a fractal pattern, you can look at diet, for example. The U.S. likes sweet, salty, and sometimes hot. Well, the Asian diet includes sour and bitter, hot and cold, and more fusion. It's a much older culture. Well, this is consistent with psychological tolerance. It's why spending time in certain Asian cultures, and Thailand is great, you can get a sense of that from the food, there is a much bigger space within Thailand for people to express a wider range of these inner personas without being shamed. And that is expressed in the fact that a young boy can go off to the city and arrive home as a ladyboy, male, transvestite, transgender, etc., with no event. It's just, that's what you decided to do. And there's tremendous fluidity in cultures of, along these lines. Just like in the United States, you can start just about any enterprise imaginable as long as it makes lots of money. You want to create pink panty-shaped dildos? How much money does it make? You want to create addictive chocolate with additives? How much money does it make? You want to create a monocrop on 4,000 acres with one type of corn? How much money does it make? Is the dominant question. Within that framework, you have complete flexibility and tremendous support. If you can be a musician that actually makes money, suddenly your parents are proud of you again. So we have flexibility in different areas and different cultures. Now, what happens with a part of the self that has been disowned and partitioned is it doesn't go away. Our energy is still inside that part of who we are, but it is disowned and experiences traumatic rejection. It experiences an antagonistic force, both from ourselves and the environment around it. Now, anytime you lock energy in a closed system, it's like a pool with stagnant water. It starts to deteriorate. It starts to decay. And that decay is part of us, but we're not owning it, because to the right of us, we have a light shadow where everything beautiful and positive and wonderful that doesn't fit into the cultural box, it goes over there off screen. And everything painful that's just too painful, it goes off screen on this other side over here, and it's not in view. It's like, here's me, none of that exists out there. Now, what's out there is actually bigger than what's in screen, what's in view, particularly in cultures that create lots of garbage, because that garbage is also a metaphor for the amount of psychological garbage. So we have, just like we'll die with 100 tons of garbage sitting in a landfill that we've created through language and through behavior. We will die with 100 tons of thoughts and feelings that we're afraid of, that we don't know what to do with, that we've wasted, with impulses that have been rejected, that are in unvaluable forms through the lens of the cult, of the conscious mind, supported by the cult, of the culture around us. Now, these energies have as much right and value to exist as any other energy. And one of the things that happens with cancer is that some part of us decides to grow rapidly and to grow out of sync with the other parts of us. So we have our body, and then cancer is a dissociated growth pattern. And there's a correlation between the amount of energy inside that we disown and refuse to attune to or talk to, and the amount of energy in our body that's inside that we refuse to connect and talk to. And if the things that we reject and deny, for example, take homosexuality in our culture, which is much more beautiful than the culture, because within a healthy expression of homosexuality, you have warmth and affection versus coldness and fear, a much more sophisticated, graceful energy to work with. It takes more energy to turn fear into something useful than it takes to turn affection and joy into something useful. So when you suppress joy between 50% of the population and you shame it, and you spend tremendous energies hiding it, and then you replace it with a sociopathic coldness that you then spend lots of energy to maintain that, you have taken a healthy expression that was 90% more energy efficient and replaced it with a dis-ease that is 90% more energy intensive. Now, in the process, this drains the battery. This drains the conscious mind of resources. And in the process of that, we're feeding the suppressive, dissociative parts of ourselves with the energy of the wall. Well, when you create a dynamic with any entity, be it yourself, an individual, a dog, doesn't matter, where the dog has no choice but to attack you to be safe, it will attack you. When you are friendly and own the dog and regulate, and you don't step on its tail and you don't hit it with a bullet and punch it to death, when you are respectful with the dog is also learns an attunement with you. And it's much more graceful to do it that way than, in this situation of violence and violation. So this explosion of dissociative energy from the light and the dark shadow, represented in part, one lens through which to consider it, is the cancerous lens. Because cancer grows faster than the body grows. When the body is fatigued through large enterprises of suppression and denial of parts of the self that want and need to grow, that need energy and attention to grow. Now, the parts that are owned, grow stronger. But it's worth noting that the most graceful shape in the universe is the sphere. It takes less energy to move the sphere than any other geometric shape. The psyche leans towards spherical, and that's its healing. If, President George Bush is now doing painting, and, what better repair to the incredibly unhealthy environment created for our presidents than to paint, to occupy to allow and invite a completely different part of our brain, our psyche, to have some space. A painter who's never, grown food or done anything, physical may find diversity in balancing that way. But the psyche is moving towards balance because balance is the point of the sphere. And sphere is the point where there is grace. And grace is the medicine of dis-ease. You have asymmetry when you have dis-ease. If someone's leaning off to the side, or they're carrying a 100-pound bucket on one side and they're leaning heavily, the body is trying to pull it into balance to find the point that there is grace. So we have all of this happening over time. And what's important to understand in terms of our relationship with ourself and then eventually our relationship with the larger world is that every moment throughout our entire life, we have related to parts of ourselves, usually conforming to the fears and needs of those around us, to relate to those parts of ourselves as they relate to them, unconsciously mirroring the external protocol. So if you need to blow your nose and you have a nice satisfying nose blow and suddenly you see all these anxious faces, they're looking at you as if you've just shot someone because that's not how you blow a nose as a lady. Well, you learn quickly that satisfying nose blowing are not welcome around here. They don't fit within the cult. And so you feel ashamed and you start hiding that and putting that. So at every moment in time, there's the full spectrum of who we are. There's what naturally comes up to be spoken, to be expressed, to be seen, to be heard. And then there's the shock pattern with the environment that says, that's okay. If you do that, we'll kill you. If you do that, we won't like you. If you do that, we'll ruin your reputation. And there's the shock pattern in the environment. And it's simply, we meet superior mass is what it boils down to. And in that situation of superior mass coming from the outside, it may feel less painful to cut off a finger than to have our whole being thrown out as being valueless and unimportant because we had that finger. And this is ritualized in gangs, where you want to join the gang, and they usually ask for a hazing of some kind. You've got to rob your family's house and steal their money, or do this or do that, or kill someone like this. You've got to cut off a part of your own innocence, a part of your humanity. And then that's the bond that we will share together, that we are the ones who have all done this. We're all in this together. We're all criminals, so we could all turn on each other, so we'll all protect each other with equal fear of the law, or whatever it is. Or we're all Christians. We don't talk about that. If you've got someone who's pregnant, send them off to a relative so that you can belong here. We don't talk about meaningful things. So if your daughter gets raped, don't talk about it. Then you'll be excluded from the club. So then the mother goes home and tells the child to betray her deepest feelings of hurt and loneliness and rage and never tell anyone and be the family's carrier of shame. Because the child is asked to hold and be the secret that the cult cannot accept, which to grow up knowing that one is unacceptable, unlovable as one is, in one's truth, is the deepest shame. The shame of being unlovable, not belonging, and in not belonging, not being secure in one's survival. Because if one's survival depends on maintaining a secret, in a context in which it takes continual energy to maintain a secret, survival is shaky. So you've got by tolerating a cult that shames and taboos certain energy, rather than understanding how to work with it. And sometimes we'll do this around, like the General Patton used the Nazis politically incorrectly to help feed and keep the German people alive when he couldn't do the job. They knew all the addresses, they knew where the firewood was, etc., etc. And so Patton turned the Nazis, the Nazi military leaders and commandos, etc., into peacekeepers. And this is a superior technology, the understanding that, and our FBI will use hackers. They'll hire hackers. Catch Me If You Can was one version with Leonardo DiCaprio and forgery, but we'll hire criminals to help understand the criminal matrix, and in doing so, take that incredible energy of cleverness and rebellion, etc., and do something good with it. Tesla Motors right now, because of its value in public safety, is paying hackers $15,000 if they can hack a Tesla. Because if it can be hacked for a $15,000 prize, it means that it's vulnerable. And so there's a reward for that process. And this is a sophistication to go from shaming anyone that's demonstrating competency in hacking to say, well, they're bad kids and they should be arrested. And then more kids come and hack this and they should be arrested too. And we incarcerate more and more of our people, as opposed to saying there's a place for the role of the challenger. And if you can show us what's flawed with our system, we can improve it, and we honor you for that. We'll give you a free car. If you can show us where we made a mistake, as opposed to a churchly dynamic where, when Galileo was inviting the bishop to look through the telescope, he was threatened with death for even suggesting that there could be a flaw in the system. So you have the range of intelligence, put someone to death for pointing out a flaw in the system, silence them under house arrest for mentioning the flaw in the system, or pay them thousands of dollars and honor them for finding the flaw so that we can all grow and improve and evolve our technology. Our sense of who we are in any given moment today is a residual synergy of all of the moments, of all of the psyche that we have repressed, denied, embraced, cultivated throughout our lifetime. Some of these are constellated as identities, and some of them are in the moment feelings. Some of these are spontaneous thoughts, and some of these have hardened into beliefs and attitudes that even when the environment diverges from a belief and an attitude, we now hold on to the belief and attitude as an identity. I am the one who is cynical, even when there's nothing to be cynical, because that's who I am, as opposed to when I see something cynical, I feel cynical, and then when that thing passes, I feel something else, and I am the one who is changing fluidly. I want to talk a little bit about what lens to view all of this through. So we have the lens of looking inside. We also have the lens of looking at the family system, at a relationship dynamic. Usually within a partner dynamic, the self is somewhat divided into two. And for example, one way this might work out is you have some fear and some anxiety and some cheerfulness, but you like the cheerful part of you, and you don't like the fearful part of you. Well, you need both, and both of them are a part of you, because if you're in an environment that will shame you and make you homeless, for example, if you don't have money, then fear is partly your friend. The fear that comes up and says, wow, if I just keep blowing money at $5,000 a week and I make $100 a week in my art, I'm going to be out in the street. And the fear says, wait a minute, this isn't a good pattern. This is not sustainable. It's not working. But you don't like the fearful part. You want to be positive, and your artist friends tell you to be, don't let anyone interfere with your art. Be flamboyant. And it's like, yeah, but I don't want to be homeless. But no, throw them to the wind. Here, have another drink. So if you want to identify with the carefree artist, one way to do it, and one way many people do this, is they then find a rich person who's very cautious and conservative and partner with them. And then they focus on being careless, and they leave all the worrying to the cautious person who focuses on being cautious. And maybe the cautious person feels much safer identifying with the caution inside than with the frivolity and the carefreeness. And so you have the irresponsible artist who can't balance a checkbook. Oh, well, the universe will provide. They're just marrying someone who's holding the counterpoint so that someone pays the bills. Because if they leave that person, who they're always criticizing and not liking because everyone should be a carefree artist, if they leave that person, they will learn very quickly that they're on the street. And they don't want to learn that, and they don't want to change, so they need that part of themselves, and they'll externalize it to another part. Or in the family system, a family system often needs a scapegoat, a place to put all the garbage in that nobody wants to deal with. Let's blame it all on this person. Our culture needs landfills desperately because it creates so much energy that it doesn't know what to do with. And so you can actually provide an incredibly useful service providing landfills. And the governments and people will be so grateful as long as it's nowhere near there. So you have this, schizophrenia between the desperately need, where can we put our garbage? Where can we ship our plastic? The Chinese don't want it. What can we do with this? And yet at the same time, get it away from me. It's terrible. So the person that provides the greatest service, here, you can put your garbage here until you figure out what to do with it, can provide a service, a coping mechanism, until the intelligence rises to a point that there is no garbage. Because we start thinking like nature. A carrot moves into a human body and excretes fertilizer for carrots. It's a complete system, no waste. But we do things that create all kinds of things where we don't know what to do with what remains. Now, what's valuable about looking at this exact same fractal pattern from the personal to the impersonal is first of all to understand that on some level it's all us, and on some level it has nothing to do with us. We are a consciousness participating in an evolutionary fractal pattern that it's at a certain point. And the design and intelligence and consciousness of the fractal pattern today produces 20% guilt, 30% fear, shame over here, partitions like this, it produces language like this, it produces mountains of plastic, etc. And we're participating in that evolution in which there's lots of pain and suffering because the pattern has not been refined. And this elevates the art of cultural design, the art of life design, as one of the hundreds of useful skills you will never learn in school, as you're busy learning terribly unuseful skills, such as algebra or something else which you'll never use, but spend a great time practicing so you pass a test, which could ultimately be used against you in a more intelligent employership environment, where the employer could say anyone who knowingly studied subjects that they knew they would never use in their whole life just to please people is not fit for the level of creativity needed to pioneer this innovation. So I'm only going to hire people who had the initiative to stick up a middle finger at their school and say, cut the crap, I'm going to learn this, this, and this on my own, and do it faster and in a more efficient way. And that's the person we're going to hire, as opposed to the people that have the degree that these people did what they were told. And so there again, it's about the environment. It's all about the environment. What's blessed and sanctioned in one culture, in one cult, in one group, is absolutely intolerable and absurd in another. And so we have this dance. But when you look from the individual to the family to the species at multiple levels, what you're doing is you're looking from different angles, different perspectives, and you're getting depth perception about the same pattern. In other words, so one of the useful things that I like to do is figure out how the debate with the president and the Congress, etc., is going on in my own head. Who's the president? Who's the Congress? What's going on there? How's the debate between the scared little part in me and a little child who's the neighbor child going on? Can I treat the neighbor child better than I treat this little one here? Can I treat this little one, how does it feel if I treat this little one the same way that I ignore those children over there? And if we understand that it's the same pattern, and that they're all just opportunities to practice, learn, grow, and love the pattern into greater symmetry, into greater grace, then the level to work at is the level at which you can see clearly. If you can see clearly how dumb they are in Washington, great. Note it all down carefully. Then take everything that you've written down and apply it to your own stupidity. Say that, okay, they're corrupt in Washington. Okay, let's look at my own corruption. They're not telling the truth. Okay, where am I lying to myself? How is it? Because we're part of this fractal pattern. And if it's going on in here, it's going on out there. If it's going on out there, it's going on in here. That's the nature of a fractal or a holographic paradigm. So changing what's going on in here changes the pattern to some degree. Changing what's going on out there, going to your neighbor and helping a child. When I went to my wife who was suffering from trauma, it was a good choice because I didn't know how to love myself as well as I knew how to love her. So it was a tremendously intelligent choice to pour all my love into loving her and simultaneously learn how to love myself. Just like in another situation, I might know how to love myself and not know how to love someone else, so then pour all the love in here and learn how to love others. Thank you for watching.